Hello, everybody. So we are going to talk about composition today. And let's go ahead and just take a look at what's behind me. So we have this nice kind of afternoon nightscape going on. Really interesting to look at this piece. This is by an artist named Archibald Motley, and this is called Barbecue. This is back in 1933. This looks like a pretty fancy barbecue. First of all, if we were to look and not have any context or content on the work, we can just purely look at it. And so what we see behind me are people who are engaging in dialogue. They're eating, they're sitting, they're standing, some are leaning, some are running. They are dressed well. You can see what they're wearing. So this is a really kind of more fancy barbecue. Also in the background, you do see that there are lights as well. So it's like this beautiful kind of evening that's going to be taking place. Even the waiter in the background, if you guys see the one on my side here, you can see the movement, the implied movement that is happening. So a lot of bustling, a lot of action in this scene. You almost can hear people talking. And of course, that's more of an idea, but maybe like people chattering, music in the background, just the idea of food moving around and glasses and music, as I just said, but that party atmosphere. And that's what I love that artists can capture that. Let's look at those some compositional elements in this piece, just from the side views, as you guys can only see the side. And this is in our textbook too, so you guys are welcome to look at this as well. If we go ahead and look at our side here, we do see the gentleman who is running or in fast pace and movement, holding on to a tray. So you could tell that this is probably a waiter. He is facing inside the piece. Imagine if the artist Motley would have changed his position and actually had the gentleman running off the scene. Anytime somebody is going off the scene, looking off the scene, running, walking, whatever it is, more than likely our eye may also go off the scene into the next, let's say, painting or artwork that's on the wall. Let's just say if it's in a gallery or museum, but it takes the viewer's attention off the piece. And the idea is that people only look at an artwork for about 3 seconds or even less today. And artists spend years sometimes creating one piece of art. So there's a lot behind an artwork besides the technique. There's also meaning, the content, the context, and it's our way that we communicate to one another. So having this artwork that we want to share with others, and then having people maybe only look at it for a few seconds is okay. But at the same time, it's really nice when somebody stops and just looks and absorbs. And there's different ways to kind of do that strategically, even by the way that objects are positioned in the scene. So for example, placing somebody inside of the piece, having these people walk into the scene, we only see their back. The gentleman in the back was leaning into the actual artwork. The other gentleman here on my top is running into the scene. This gentleman here, who has his back positioned about 3/4, he's going inward. So having these different directional elements keeping you in the artwork almost act as a wall or barrier or like a fence, kind of like a picture frame that keeps you in the artwork. So rather than you moving off the scene to go to the next whatever's next to it, it keeps you engaged in dialogue and your eye is going back and forth, almost playing like this little ping pong ball game of keeping the eye within the artwork. And then you get to appreciate and enjoy even more and see what's happening. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of slides. So one moment as I share my screen. Principles of design. So this is one of your vocabulary terms that you may already been aware of, but the arrangement of the elements in or the subject matter of an artwork. So the arrangement of the elements in or the subject matter of an artwork. So how are elements arranged together? A successful composition draws the viewer's eye, hopefully, pulls their eye across the entire piece, whatever that is, so that everything is taken in and finally settles on the main subject of the artwork. So we talked a little bit about focal points already. Sometimes focal point is where you see immediately. Sometimes your eye has to be led to that area and then settles on the main subject of that artwork. So the average amount of time that somebody looks at an art piece is very short, as we just mentioned, about 3 seconds. Here's an artwork. Let's go back to the time period of the Baroque movement. This is back in the 1600s, and this is by an artist named Caravaggio. Caravaggio was known for the idea of chiaroscuro, and that's with a really strong dramatic light source where you have just really light values and really dark, rich values, which we see very evident in the scene. The background is almost theatrical. We have this dark black matte sort of scene that we don't know what's happening behind it. And then we have our main actors or the main figures in the front that we're getting to enjoy and partake in this storyline that he's creating. So you may be familiar with this story. It's a biblical story of young David killing Goliath. So David is on the left-hand side here. He has a sword behind his back, and now he's holding up the head of Goliath. Goliath just been decapitated. And so what's interesting about this scene is it's after the fact. If you do a lot of different art history research, there's a lot of different famous artists that depict David and Goliath scenes. A lot of people like the David and Goliath scene because it has to do with the underdog, the one who may not be expected to win or have victorious forms in this, which I think all of us can relate to in our own lives. There's been times that we didn't think we would succeed, or it's been a difficult struggle or story we have, but that triumphant and that sense of accomplishment always makes us feel very excited to see that people are succeeding in hard times or in when the odds are against them. But going back to artists who create this scene, sometimes they will create the sense of the start of the fight or the middle of the fight. In this case, this is the end. And also, if you do research about Caravaggio, it's really interesting how he depicts himself. He's actually in the scene, the artist. Can you guys guess who the artist is? There's only 2 figures, right? We have Goliath and we have David's head. We have Goliath's head and we have David. So he actually depicted himself as Goliath, the decapitated figure in this one. So he modeled his face, his portrait, after this figure here of Goliath. Interesting to think about this, right? We're not discussing Caravaggio at all or understanding his content of his life, which I invite you to please research him. But we're starting to see a little bit of insight of, you know, what's behind this artist? Why did he capture himself as the villain, as the one who died? What's going on in the scene? The rule of thirds is being applied in this piece, which is what we're going to be discussing. This is where you have divisions. You divide lines, vertical and horizontal, into 3s. And where the lines intersect, that is where the focal point typically could be in the rule of thirds. AKA, the other way that one could say this is you just don't put your focal point in the dead center. So if you guys look at the piece behind me, I know it's a small icon right now, and I'm kind of covering a lot of it. But when you look at the real scene, there's going to be a lot of different interactions of figures. And so the focal point probably will be on the sides or the front or the top. But it's neat to see when artists utilize the rule of thirds and how they play off on that. Here's another piece we'll talk a little bit about in when we discuss our Venetas artwork. So overall, I won't discuss much about this, but Audrey Flack is the artist of this piece, and she is utilizing the rule of thirds. Now, some people will say the golden mean, golden sectional, or golden ratio, that's also known well, but very similar, just the measurements are slightly different, but the idea is that you're off-centering the focal point. Now, there's a lot going on in this piece, which again, we'll discuss later on, but more than likely your focal point may be the skull. Your eye might be attracted to that. It's a large shape. It's kind of more not as detailed as all the other trinkets and objects within it. And it's facing inward again. So this is interesting too, just like again, the image that we looked at with Motley, how we have the figures running in the scene. We have the skull positioned inside of the scene. We also have the girl's face up here, the portrait. She's also facing in the scene. We also have the angled mirror with the reflection of the skull facing in the scene as well. So you can see how artists strategically, again, are placing objects to push you in the piece rather than out of the piece. So this is building a composition. When I work with my drawing students or painting students or design students, we talk about looking at the overall scene. And there's a lot of information that we can look at, especially if it's an outdoor scene or interior scape. But how do we work with that? How do we maneuver? How do we create something? So we choose the size we want to work with in our picture plane. We work with vertical or horizontal format. We can do open or closed composition, which we'll discuss that a little bit more in our class. But open composition basically is where the objects extend beyond the borders of the picture plane. And so that would be example again on my little minimized thumbnail here on my screen. The objects are cut out. So for example, we only see a piece of maybe the gentleman's form. We don't see the other part of his maybe body. Same with the other gentleman here on the bottom of the foreground. So that is how we typically take pictures, right? We take pictures where there's going to be more information, but we kind of edit the scene out. So open composition, objects extend beyond the borders of the picture plane. Closed composition is where everything is contained in the picture plane. This one's not as common. You may see this for advertisement. If someone is selling an object, they just put the object in the center and then they have a nice neutral background and take a photograph. Nothing else is around, no other information. So it's purely looking at that object. If you think of a driver's license or passport photo, typically that's a closed composition because the face is in the middle, the dead center. Now, yes, we could argue the shoulders are only showing part, and that could be open composition because the whole body is not showing. But for the most part, if we look at it as a face portrait, it would be closed. So all the objects are contained within the picture plane. We have no objects that are moving out of the picture plane. We talk about having a light gesture sketch, and then it continues on with that. Rule of thirds, as we just discussed, that's 2 equally spaced horizontal and 2 equally spaced vertical lines. There's also the golden ratio, which is a numerical sequence of 1.618. Here's if we are using the golden mean or golden ratio, it is divided into a series of box-shaped forms. So cube-like structures. When one uses the golden ratio or golden mean, they could invert it, make it vertical, horizontal, but the idea is where the boxes or where the shapes accumulate together smaller and smaller, that is where the focal point is located, where the eye goes to. This is also done with web design, many different ways, cinematography. In this case, I went ahead and put a Bank of America website here. And if the eye goes to the left-hand side, typically it might because it's very plain or very neutral in its color schemes, not much going on, the eye might be attracted more to that red side. The eye goes there first. That's a focal point. If, for example, the web designers put the sign-in red box here in the center, that would be breaking the rule of thirds, breaking the golden mean and golden ratio because now they're not utilizing those principles. And that's fine if one doesn't. But I just want to tell you guys about this concept or theory. Here are some still images of using the rule of thirds. Again, one could also say golden mean, golden ratio. I stick with the rule of thirds. Again, the math is slightly different, but the idea is that you are having these intersecting lines and the focal points are off center. Either they're up on the top or they're at the bottom. So an advertisement as well. Notice this rideshare poster. The young boy is silhouette with his bike, but he's riding into the scene, into the actual composition. If we placed him the opposite way and he was riding out of the scene, more than likely the eye might also go out of the scene too. So how these are positioned is super interesting. The Starbucks logo, of course, it's all about advertisement, branding, that sense of purchasing and wanting to get clientele. So logos are important, but the logo's facing inward as well. So that cup has like almost like a barrier or a wall trying to pull you into the artwork, AKA poster. Here's an advertisement of a magazine. So we have Art in America. We have a red Mylar balloon that matches the background. But what's really strategically planned is this little tiny point at the edge. So the sharp tip at the edge of this balloon perhaps brings you over to the content to want to read about who is in this issue. So really nice how that's planned. Just hired Time Magazine. So just hired from the back of this gentleman's cap for graduating is the focal point probably. Our eyes are attracted to this. However, if the photographer would have put the cap and gown right in the center, they would have been breaking the rule of thirds. So these both, again, are utilizing that theory. Visual weight. So this is an advertisement for a Man of Steel film. And we can tell that we already know what's going on. He's flying, right, over a cityscape. And all that motion, that movement already gives implied sense that he is in a movement stature. There's a lot of heaviness if we purely look at the shape itself. A lot of large shape. We have open shape here with the lighter values. But what's really well and strategically done with these graphic designers is they went ahead and blurred out where there is now just darker value here, and they put text horizontally. So you have the figure on the top, you have the text horizontally, and it starts to become this barrier or wall, or starts to help visual weight. If, for example, we were to change this, and I just edited this myself, say the poster looked like this. I mean, I know we need to have content to it with words, but this would be kind of too visually heavy. It's almost like the figure could just fall down. It's just too much weight, too much movement going on. So again, what really helps is having this horizontal wording and then having it darker value. Helps with the eye. Visual weight. So visual weight, again, what we just discussed about. A heaviness or lightness and arrangement of a composition. Here is Halo. So this is a game, and these are two figures, right? They're facing inward. Strategically well designed again, because since these figures are so darkened in value on the edges, they act as wall or barriers to keep the eye in. So as we look at this, we tend to get stuck, again, playing this ping pong ball with the eye back and forth. And we're starting to just look at their little eye areas with the colors maybe. And we stay in that for a while. Maybe we start to look at the background and we start to be invested in to see what's happening in the storyline. Remember too that advertisement has a purpose, right? They want clients and there's money behind it. So the idea is having a really strong composition, even in the advertising field, or maybe in a business field, wanting people to look at your posters or your website or your logo design. All has a play on the idea of this compositional elements. In many cases, even color theory plays off on that too. When you think about color theory, if you think about cool colors versus warm colors, what's your audience? Who's attracted to what color? What is it saying? Do you trust that color? Do you feel comfortable with that color? And I know I'm kind of pulling into some other things right now, but I want you guys to think about that. So thank you. We're going to go ahead and stop this session for now. There's so much more to talk about, so we'll continue on. But thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Please continue to look at art and start thinking about how the artist positioned the objects. Objects in this case are people. How are the people positioned? And this is strategically done by Archibald Motley. Thank you, everybody.